So I very much appreciate you guys taking your time out to talk about teaching specialized populations in a digital setting. Please make sure you're putting those questions in Q&A. I'm going to be naturally stopping, checking to make sure that if clarification's needed, that's there. One of the reasons why both Karen and I have our videos off, it seems to help in such large groups, not having that just for making sure all of these pieces work together. Okay. Setting the tone, let's get started. So when you enter into a classroom and you're thinking about what that instruction or that live interaction time looks like, it's really important that you're setting a tone just like you did in your classrooms, right? You had a morning procedure when they'd come in, you prep, whether it was for our older students, switching classes from class to class, if it is in elementary, when they're coming in the beginning of the day, recesses, lunch, and etc. So making sure you're consistent, and ground rules are vital for this purpose. When the kids come into this digital space, constantly reminding them of the ground rules really entices them and gives them that interaction piece that they need in order to set their mind on learning, right? They're in their homes, they're with their siblings, they're with their parents possibly. We have some very diverse circumstances where we have some families who are essential workers, we have some families who are not, and we need to make sure that we're setting that tone. That way we get those agreements and that they know that they're ready for that learning period. One of the things that I believe in is front load, front load, front load. So you're making sure that you have a sheet for parents that's explicitly showing them how to use tools and things. We can't predict that, even though under the best of circumstances, our parents and guardians are attempting to support students in the learning, but they need those quick sheets. That's a quick copy and paste, like copying and pasting how it looks to be in a Zoom meeting, copying and pasting how it would look to be in a Blackboard collaborative meeting, or Adobe Connect or WebEx, or whatever platform your school has us using. This works for anything. If you're using Google Classroom, giving them a quick sheet that they can know how to navigate that. Being very explicit, because this is all new territory, right? We're in the wild west of digital distance learning, and giving those pieces that they can quickly reference to, that's an easy guide, is really helpful. Last thing is being super consistent on format. The same PowerPoint, and what I mean by that is like using the same template of PowerPoint, sections of the lesson and the flow. So when they come to class, just like when they're accustomed to, by now that we're in April, your teaching style, that you're translating the best you can. And that means clear, consistent, concise PowerPoint or Google Slides with not a ton of extra pieces, right? Like setting the tone. I just have this. I don't have graphics. I don't have Snoopy. I don't have all these other pieces, because I just want you focusing at hand. There's a lot of distractions, because remember, we didn't go from the classroom to homeschooling. We're in crisis education mode, and that's a very different way of functioning and a very different way of being. Let me show you examples of that. So in a middle school example could be the cork board, where you've built that community building. I know in junior high and high school, I always collaborate with my students on what the expectations are, so it could look more like this. If you're in our elementary settings, or if you need more simplistic, it can look like what it is on the right. Whatever way it is, it just needs to be that way all the time. Whatever rule following, whatever steps in place, that needs to be, that needs to happen this way. Okay, so here we go. Let me check for understanding. So these are two examples. You would put it on the slide. All I do is take that slide and make it a PDF. That's how I do it. Or I put it in an announcement to them, or I put it in a Google Sheet that I share out to them. Whatever format you're formally communicating with your families, that's the format I give them. And then the students then see that every time they come into class. I hope that helps. Some of those technical things we can talk about at a different time. So does anyone have any other questions on just setting tone and how that would look visually before I move on? I'm checking The chat, I'm checking Q&A. There's snippet tools on yours pieces. Here's two more that you can see. I gave you an example. If your classroom, if you're one that has a poster already set, and those can translate well because we're doing our best, we're making mistakes, you're more than welcome to use that. If that's consistent for your students, you know best practice, that's there for you. Any other questions on this? All right, if you were ready to move on, you're giving me the letter O into chat. Okay, so these are examples embedded in your slides. If you need to front load where you send out a video where you talk to the students about that, that's perfectly acceptable. If it's a document, whatever communication means that you have is fine. Let's continue. Okay, let's look at instruction. Instruction and activities. When you're setting the stage, especially when we are doing things like, and this is new language or new ways of thinking this for you. So if you're looking at doing, right, for our special ed team and we're looking at our caseload and we need to do some cold probing because there's no way in the schedule for you to push in with our gen ed counterparts, you could be using your live session time to do those kinds of things. If you are English, if you're ELD support and you're working on, right, ELD curriculum, you can also do it in this format. There's lots of different ways to communicate. I want you to know that the diversity of what you're teaching is applicable. You're able to add it into this if you can follow these steps. So if you look, you want to keep your instructions and activities simple and concise. So one action for one slide. You want to have clear written, and then you want to say those verbal instructions. And oftentimes you have to check for understanding, right? So when I have the instructions on the slide, I'm going to check for understanding. I'm going to give them the activity, and I'm going to check again for understanding. I'm going to give them support to do that activity, and then I'm going to check for understanding. I'm going to check in and check in and check in.
Anna, can you give an example of what cold probing might look like for special ed teachers who can't see their students?
It is on here. That's the next couple slides. So yes, it also, I did a writing one. So if you have a writing goal, I have examples of what that would walk through. And then for our ELD and other supports with speech and language or with working with our English language learners, that's why I chose writing. So we're going to walk through that. Absolutely. I'm just front loading what I'm going to be doing. So you need to give wait time. Wait time feels hard. It's hard as teachers. Remember when we first started, I remember not wanting to rush through everything. One of those natural ways that I talk about wait time is to use a timer. So if you're using Zoom, Zoom doesn't have a timer embedded into. So there are tons of free apps for timers, and I use the Jeopardy one. And so the kids can hear, and I keep it very low. So I don't have it attached to this piece, right? I don't have it attached to my computer. I have it on my phone, which is near where my microphone is. So it's a low background noise rather than it feeling so intense, because we do have students that can be distracted by it. It feels like in a digital setting silence, friends. It feels like silence. It feels like no one's there. You're just talking into bliss. But they need that wait time to process what you're asking them to do, just like you did in the classroom. And you also need broadband connection time, because what I say and when you hear it isn't instantaneous, especially with our state having so many remote workers, all of us distance learning, lots of people are using lots of things. Next things to keep thinking. Monitoring responses. You know your children. This is one of the things that, like, if we want to look at silver linings of what's happening in this particular circumstance, is that we are not in September. We let most of us transition to this crisis mode in March. We know our students. We know how they say things. We know their mannerisms. We've built relationships. So you know those things. and you know what they're capable of, and you know how they respond, because one of the things that occurs in a digital platform is when you write things down, it sounds more intense. Giving written feedback is much difficult for students to process and to understand, and to be triggered with frustration than it is when you have them come up to your desk and you have that one-on-one talk. That's applicable in our distance learning, but it's just something to keep in mind. And knowing those responses and how the kids are responding, you know them, so you know what they mean, you know what they're trying to say, and you can really engage them in that learning. And I always say, for everything, and you guys do this amazingly in your classrooms, and you're going to do this amazingly in your distance learning, is you follow up. Giving affirmation and giving extra supports. There is constant need for students to hear those attaboys. They are in crisis just like we are. They need us to give us those supports. They need us to give those confirmations. They need to give those follow-ups, so they know that we're still here and we care about them and we're here to support them, and they're doing an amazing job progressing through what we're asking them to do while being in a global pandemic. All right, so let's check in. I can absolutely look at, this is what I'm going to walk you through what a session with your students look like, and then what I can do is I will address numerous different platforms of what that could possibly be. Give me an X if you're ready to see my example, and then I'll address some of those other concerns. Okay, so looking at this being our next activity, is here's one that I borrowed from my very good friend, Mrs. O. So I'm giving you an example of what hers looks like. I've done something very similar. And so she pulled this from January. So they're coming back from break, right? And a lot of you guys who are just starting distance learning, you are re-engaging your students of what this looks like. You can also have supported slides, prompts and things. So if you are a speech pathologist, if you are dealing with mental health services, a lot of what you would give them, maybe a one-sheeter or a prompt or something you want them to do, those manipulatives on the ground, you can translate into a PowerPoint, you can translate to a Google Doc that you share, you can translate into Google Slides, whatever methodology you want to share that with, you can, that's applicable. Okay, so welcome back. She's talking about what happened. Discuss what we did over break, talk about transition words and linking words, write a paragraph on a writing prompt. She is now giving, this is a goal probing lesson that we're doing. These discussions is going to be their agenda of what they're dealing with. You guys can translate that to whatever you want, right? We're in a small group and we're going to be discussing how we deal with positive ways of how we deal with stress. You can start with what individual or small group for what current topics you need to discuss with your speech students if you're doing that small group or individual. This is just setting the stage. It's really simple. They know what's happening, simplistic language, whatever, and you know your students. I can't stress this to you enough. If you know the students, you know who you're working with, you can craft this specifically for those students the way that works best for them, those keywords, those choices. So they talk about that. This is what her classroom rules look like when she's in this classroom. They know this. This is what they talk about one another. Her students would give that, she would prompt, or a student, we would prompt once we give those classroom rules, like, you give me a green check mark if you agree to our classroom rules. So like you would say, give me an A if you understand the classroom rules and what we're going over today. And then all the students would write that into the web chat, just like I've been transitioning you. Why? I cannot stress enough the focus on the classroom rules and what we're holding them accountable for. So when we need to type in the chat to our student to calm down, or to get on the mic and go, okay, Johnny, I want you to take a deep breath. We need to refocus on what we're doing. And remember a classroom rule. They've seen us. They have it. They can remember it and follow up. We get into the activity. We do an objectives and standards page. So, and I like to write I can statements, right? That's supporting kids to take ownership of what they're doing. For mental health services, you might want to talk about like the goal of the session. If you are wanting, so I can communicate how I think and feel, could be something like that. In speech pathology or any of the other related services, you can just tell them like what and give that I can statement, which addresses the goal. So by the end of the session, this is what we're trying to address. So it's in kid-friendly language and it is in something that they can achieve. I put the standards there for you because I know that some teachers in some districts do require that our IV goals be tethered to standards. Here are some examples of those. If you don't need that, don't use it. So you talk about how your break was. This can be a brain break time. This is when they can just share out what they feel. This is their warm up. How was your break? They came back from winter break. You guys, they've had a break from school. This is the way you can do this. You could do a prompt, something just to get their everything moving, brain moving, they're engaged. You can tell them, this is where you'll notice if a student's having difficulty hearing, if they're struggling with writing the text, you can give additional prompts just to make sure that they're engaged and working. Let's learn some stuff where this is that transitional slide that you can give for your students that you're just front loading. Okay, this is what we're going to do next. Here are transition words. This would be typically for for this particular class. This is something that you can give as visuals. You don't need to give all of this, right? I know with all of our support services, oftentimes you're giving these pieces. And so this is really helpful to give the visuals, like we're working on transition words. So here's the visual. You have it here, right? You have it in your Google Classroom. I've handed it to you. You have it in an email that I sent to you. This is in your packet. So wherever you are placing it, I also put on the slide so I know where they can reference it. So those activities can happen here. Those activities can happen in extension. This could be a support time. So if you're working with your gen ed teachers and you're just going over and breaking down what those assignments are, that's a possibility as well. We're giving the writing prompt. This is a writing prompt that we're having students doing. So this is and we're using these samples to support our progress monitoring on our IEP. This could be also for our ELD students as we're getting them closer to exiting our ELD curriculum. This prompt could be in your small group or individual counseling where somewhere you want to start off on. Speech pathology, you could give them an exercise. Whatever it is that you're doing, this is how clear it needs to be. Just a slide, we're just doing this and giving that instruction piece. I'm being more detailed than your district might ask you to. I'm doing it on purpose so you can see how, as we continue on with our distance learning, how specific or how diverse you can be in these sessions. In a breakout room, I'm putting all my students in a breakout room and I've given them all the resources that I've explicitly taught them. And then under the platform that we use, the students can actually type on the board. Perhaps in your sessions, if you're using Zoom or something else, you could use a Google Doc that you've already shared that they have a copy that they could directly write on. You could do a myriad of different things. They could write it on a piece of paper and send you a picture of it after or what have you. It really is your discretion with your district on how you're doing it. But what I wanted to show you is that all of their information is here. They have the prompt, they have the transition words. Go ahead.
Can I address something, Anna? Yeah, so I just want to say that all of your districts are doing different things because we're a very diverse state in terms of student population, in terms of whether we're in a large urban or in a rural area or in between. So anything that impacts your working conditions, so that could be actually like for a special ed teacher in terms of how much time you're spending in general ed classrooms, like with live teaching, all of that can be bargained if it's a working condition issue. And many associations are bargaining what we call MOUs around the COVID shutdown. So I would really talk to your union about these specific issues, because that is a local decision, and CTA staff are working with local associations on these issues to hopefully minimize equity impacts on students and also to minimize equity impacts on teachers. And then the way that you're providing services right now during the shutdown, that's really also a local decision in some ways. The state and the federal government have directed that that IEP timelines have not changed and that IEP should still be in place, and that if you have to change IEPs, then you could either do an addendum and IEP teams would then make decisions about making up service minutes. So I just want to kind of answer that broadly while Anna's talking. That way we can kind of focus on what she's doing, because I think Anna is giving you a really good foundation in terms of consistency, so that your students with like processing issues, maybe who struggle with executive functioning, can really struggle, and you can kind of like break down that barrier for them. So we can answer any other questions about those types of service things maybe at the end, but your CTA staff person is a person to go to, and your union president. So they have access to a ton of resources on all of these MOUs and things like that. So hopefully that kind of, I felt like I was answering a lot of questions around that, so I just want to kind of help everyone with that situation. Fine. So we're all living like different lives here, unfortunately.
Exactly. No, and it's fine. So one of the things, so I'm looking in the chat, so I want to address two things. So depending on your platform, whether you're in a Zoom, you're not using Zoom, you're using Blackboard, Collaborative, WebEx, Adobe Connect, or anything in the like, most platforms offer breakout rooms, which means you're putting them in, you can put them in a small group room, you can put them in their own room by themselves. That's an option. I'm showing you what I've done and other teachers have done, where you could have them stay all in the regular room and you could watch them do it on Google Documents and not move them at all. I'm just showing you different options. And then if you're giving whatever the prompt you're giving, so if you continue to think, okay, I'm showing you a writing example because I felt like that would carry across most individuals who are at this, but then also looking at, it doesn't really matter what's on the slide. Like there's not, like, don't think that, oh, this is only for gen ed teachers, or this is just for our mild to moderate, or it's just, you can break down and put as many things that you would use visually with, you can share video, you can show manipulatives, you can do a lot of different things that specifically speaks to how you're servicing your students. I'm just giving you a platform of what criteria needs to be in place in a distance environment versus what you guys do best practice in your classrooms. And I know it's difficult for that.
So I think we're getting a few questions about breakout rooms. So I don't know if one of us can explain it, how that works.
Yeah, so what you would do is, it depends on your platform, first of all. So like how to do it depends, because how to do it on Blackboard or Adobe Connect or WebEx is very different than Zoom. As the host, when you're the host, you guys are not, you guys are just participants and attendees into the space. You can move students in and out of those places. That makes them, just like, that translates to like seat work. If you're not comfortable with doing that, you don't have to necessarily doing that, but that's where that would fall into place. And since we have such a diversity of what your local district is asking you to do, that's going to be differentiated based on that. Yeah, I'm just giving you this option.
We were just in a CDE work group before this webinar, and so there were 100 of us, and we were all placed by the host into different chat rooms, and the little button popped up on our screen and literally said, you're being moved to this group. And through the miracle of technology, we were literally in another chat room, just like you're in now, but with only 10 people. And then at the end of the 30 minutes, I think it said you're being moved back to the regular group. And then all of a sudden we were all together. So it is kind of like magic. every platform is different, but that's basically what it is.
One of the things that I always default into is expecting that my students are not getting support from home. If I look at it as an equity standpoint, I want to ask them to do as many things as they can do as independently as they can do it, as I possibly can. That's not going to translate to everybody. I am not sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, this is all just going to work for these students, because we know that there is a disconnect, that not all of our students are going to necessarily be able to transition into this environment. But we're going to do the best we can, because remember, it's not someone choosing to be a virtual learner. We're in a crisis mode. And so that's why I'm addressing it this way. The format in which that we're giving this is that this is what I'm asking the student to do. That way, and I'm going to capture this writing prompt, and then I'm going to write progress notes for my student in tandem with their IEP writing goal. I'm going to write notes about how the progress of my students for my ELD group. I'm going to be taking notes like I would normally in right after a speech, after speech therapy or after a counseling session, those kinds of things. This is an option for you. Whatever you're making on the screen, it's very simplistic. The students have all their tools in one place, and they're able to do the action you're asking them to do. So once they're done, because so let me break it down even further. Like, I'm asking them to do that, but then I'm constantly checking in to make sure they're doing all right. So if I have the students in breakout rooms, I can come in and say, well, Karen, I really appreciate how hard you're working. Great job. If they're in a Google Doc, I can be writing comments. I can give them emojis and smiley faces as they're working, and they can see that in real time. It depends. Like I said, there's a lot of diversity in that feedback and that encouragement, right? Give me 2 more words of what you mean about what you said. Say that to me again. I'm really interested in that next comment. And you're doing all those things that you naturally prompt during your face-to-face sessions. You can point to things and things like that. You're just translating it to here. Transitioning out, right? You've asked them the task, right? I wouldn't necessarily keep a student for longer than necessarily 30 minutes, just because of the modality that we're in. If they need more time, they could have more time, but I'm going to transition them out. So pulling them out of breakout rooms, which is a click of a button, they all return, hi, you guys, can everyone hear me? And then you give them something to do to tell them that, smiley face, heart, thumbs up. That's in Zoom, Blackboard. They have those functions that you have. We don't have that, obviously, because there's so many of us here. And then I transition them out. And so I say, great job. And I ask them to give me a virtual high five, or I give them a smiley face, or whatever that exit transition piece. And then you can give them their next steps of what you'd like them to do. Continue working on what Mrs. Acosta provided you in your 2nd grade work. I'm going to see you next week when we have our time together again, right? Whatever that is, this is that piece. And then you keep saying, I'm going to be checking on you. I'm going to be emailing you. I'm going to be calling. I'm going to be, however you're following up with that piece is really beneficial. And you're reminding them that it's just this way. And so those are ways you can transition them out, because they're going to then be offline with you, and you can continue working on. Any questions on like how a lesson / timed PowerPoint support, those visual supports you can do during your time with them? Let me check sorry. One of the ways to transition students out of work or pull something that their general ed teacher did is to pull what that person did. So if I pulled this from a general ed teacher, right? These are the things they're being asked to do. And you know what's assigned for you. This is a great way of doing this. It's breaking it down. You can email it out to them. You can give them hyperlinks. You can go all kinds of other things. If you're working with students, especially because social emotional, health is such important topic at this time for all of our students, regardless of categorization, giving them those links or prompts of what to do with dealing with their stress. So like, I have a one-sheeter where my students have been taught explicitly how to have a mindfulness moment, and they know how to sit in a certain posture and they breathe for a minute. Playlist or anything that you need, or even if this is your, maybe you're working, you can't push in with your gen ed teacher and your special ed teacher who does that with minutes, and you know you have students and you're just taking what that teacher is and breaking it down even further. This visual where you're going, I'm explaining this to you and now I'm going to send it out. Anything like that that you need to do to help give them just clear instructions, because oftentimes our students are constantly prompted on where they're going, right? So if they're doing pull out for speech, they get a slip or they have a clock on their desk that says, oh, on Tuesdays we do this, and their teacher reminds them. This is the way you're digitally doing it the best you can.
I think you're breaking up, Anna. I can't hear you.
No, we're in this evolution. Just know that this is just a platform to be examples of what that could visually look like for you, and you augment it based on how you're servicing your students, the students' needs themselves, and what the expectation of how you're fulfilling those minutes.
Yeah, I think it's important just to note, because I taught general ed and I taught SDC and I taught resource and I was a middle school teacher. These are really like great procedures to have no matter what format you're using, I think. So whether it's like, whatever that might look like, even if you're not doing live teaching, I think you can really set clear expectations and clear directions. And so I don't think you even have to use this in live teaching. So just think about like how this applies to your situation in terms of being very clear and just kind of lowering that the mental load of your students. And I think this is what that's doing, right? It's lowering the mental load and lowering the frustration for your students so that they're more likely to be engaged.
Right. I typically, it depends on grade level. If you're doing recordings, you're walking through that material, and the beauty of recordings would be that the student can start right recording. They can actually go back and rehear you. If you're in live sessions for our elementary school level students, I would, an attention span that's going to be based on those populations, I would never have a single section on a single topic longer than 60 minutes. And that 60 minutes is going to have a lot of time where my students are doing something or interacting in some way, if that helps. So right now I've transitioned it into the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing because I want to spend some considerable time, since we have it, really digging into how it's going for you guys, because a lot of you all are having different experiences. You're getting different district directions. Some are doing live sessions, some are not, that kind of thing. I gave you one example. Regardless of the choice of whatever you're acting on, you're gonna give it in some simplistic format that they can follow, because just like going over that with you, I made it into a PDF. You guys can have that and look at it and go over it again, just like with your students. So we have the Q&A open, we have chat open. How can I answer questions or give perspective or anything like that? So I'm going to turn off my mic so you can hear what it looks like for that wait time. I'm going to put a timer on and give you guys 2 minutes to just kind of type out what concerns you may have.
Do you want me to, if they raise their hand, I can allow them to talk?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a couple people who have their hands raised. So if you can find the hand, raise your hand, and we can do that. And I'm going to go to Cynthia Alvarez, and then Kazan, and then Christina. Okay, you're on, Cynthia. You have to forgive me. I am hitting unmute, but it's okay. There we go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. So we're going to go to Kazan.
Yeah, I don't have a question either. Was there a hand raised icon for me or something?
Yep, that's okay. No worries. I'm going to lower your hand.
Thank you.
Here we go. Melissa.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just great.
Okay,
thanks.
Great. Well, I've been saying this in the Q&A, but I haven't gotten a response. In our district, we are told we can't do any live sessions, and I'm a speech therapist, and we are told we can't do any group sessions, and that is all because of confidentiality. So I'm kind of stymied on what to do, and I'm trying to take the information you have here and translate it into, our parameters. But I'm also curious, I guess this is a training given by CTA, which is responsible for districts throughout California. Is that correct?
Well, we're not really, can I answer this one, Anna?
I don't mean responsible, but that
Yes,
it's not just
absolutely.
going out to my district.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I'm just really confused because they're really very insistent on no live, no group.
Yeah, so let me answer that. So that's not true. So actually CTA today, myself and two other colleagues just worked on a Q&A for your union. So we're not really in charge of districts. We actually are your teachers union, and we work with your local association to provide information. So I would recommend you go to the ASHA website. They actually have information on providing services, but if you use HIPAA compliant software, so like Zoom for healthcare is actually HIPAA compliant. You can use it for teletherapy, and in fact, the federal government is recommending that speech language pathologists do provide services through video conferencing or through the telephone at this time. And
okay,
if you're,
but by that, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. By that, I mean we can use that, but our district is saying we cannot do groups and we cannot.
Yeah, so that's, well, they might be saying that, but you certainly can do that. You are allowed to by law. So I would recommend talking to your teachers union about that, because there's no justification for that. I hope that. So there's no justification. And in fact, we just wrote a FAQ all on speech services and that. So I would talk to your, what association are you in? What union are you in?
EGAE.
What does that stand for?
Elk Grove.
Oh, you're in Elk Grove. Yeah. So talk to Maggie Ellis. Is she still your president?
Yes, she's our contact.
Yeah, I would talk to Maggie, because we just put out information on that today, but there's no reason for your district. So that's a great question. I'm glad that came up.
And where is that FAQ so that I can read it and share it with my group?
So we don't have access to it. So we haven't released it publicly. So so we have it. It's in a folder online that should be accessible to your staff person and your president. We have so whoever your staff person is, I can't think of the name offhand, but I would talk to Maggie and have her talk to your PCS, your primary contact staff person. So hopefully other people on here, if you're also a counselor, Zoom is also HIPAA compliant. If you're paying for that, it's about $200 a month. So yeah, and ASHA, go to ASHA's website. They have a lot of great information on that as well. But thank you for asking that. That's a great question. And it's an issue that's been coming up. So.
Will you mute me, or do I mute myself, or how do?
I will lower your hand and mute you. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, we have a few others here. Veronica Lewandowski. So Veronica,
Yes,
go for it. A question for Anna.
Question for Anna?
A question for Anna?
Oh, you were asking about what platforms or what we have been doing. And so I had created a Google Classroom and was kind of concerned that students are able to see each other. Like if we created a Google Classroom for our students with IEPs to be able to give them individual assignments for, meeting their goals, things like that, because that would be a really helpful way, especially with those of us who work with multiple grade levels. It would be really difficult to jump on the individual teachers' platforms. I'd be in about 20 classrooms in that case. And just kind of getting an idea, like, does that sound like that's okay? I have reached out to my district. They said that should be fine, but just kind of an overall question to anyone.
Yeah, so that's totally absolutely fine because in a Google Classroom, you can individually provide resources. So just Johnny Joe, you can assign those things. Just because if you think about in working order in an SDC class, or if an instructional aide pushes into a DE class, if you're co-teaching, there is some awareness that the other students are in the same classroom. You're not divulging that confidential information, right? You're giving them supports attached to those goals versus saying this goal, we're dealing with this. That's on your end. The students necessarily, if they see you, some kids are working on a writing assignment or have you, wouldn't see that, just like when you put work up on the wall or something like that. So if you're more concerned, I would just individually assign work. But if you're assigning lessons, kids see each other, but they get assignments, if that helps.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. And also, I know this has kind of been discussed that it's not a part of this webinar in particular, but to me it is when we're thinking about doing lessons for students, especially for students who get separate setting, and looking at whatever parameters or instructional minutes our school sites or our district is giving us. We do need to work within that time frame of instructional minutes per day that's been given, correct? We shouldn't be giving students additional work beyond that. Is that correct?
So I feel like sometimes that's murky water because of the fact that different districts or even different school sites are giving those other options. What I would say is, if you're running into a fact of like, this is just good teaching, you have a student who is drowning in the work that they're already being given and they're working on it, that some ways that you can support them, and I'm going to use your Google Classroom as the example, is taking what that child's already been taught, and it's really easy for teacher to share and breaking just those lessons down in more manageable pieces and giving them time frames. You can split them up with copy and paste or a snippet tool. Those are free. You can download them on any computer, and breaking it. Okay, so Johnny's going to do, we have math and ELA today. I'm going to split those in half and say this part you're going to do right here and complete it, and split this part. I'm going to give extra instructions on the side of it, and those kinds of things. And that's really easy to do in Google Docs as you're adding comments and text boxes and things. And that can be a manageable way rather than giving them something additional.
Okay.
If students aren't getting those things, right? So you have to, the reason why to follow up on that, the reason why I gave for like a writing goal as the example, or a speech and language goal, or a fluency goal, sometimes our students aren't working, right? Most of all of schools are closed. So that follow through of what they're choosing or not choosing to engage in the curriculum, sometimes getting them into live session just with you and having them do something in real time can be a way to manage those things when students aren't necessarily accessing the curriculum or accessing the live sessions in your general ed counterparts, that you can do those in real time, and that would count because you have that, whether it's verbal or written or whatever, you have that piece that shows their progression through the goal. So we have a question on what about students who cannot read? So there's lots of ways to do that. You can give students visuals of what you want them to do. They can have mic privileges and answer to you. There is tons of resources in both for English language learners as well as with audiobooks. So Audible has, if you Google Audible free, they have tons of audiobooks that are available at the separate site they've created. Storyline is another excellent one where celebrities, so they're, that's an engagement piece, read picture books. That one I like the most. I actually use it with my students right now because it's done more in a Reading Rainbow format. You can do pictures and have them talk to you. What you're asking them to do is relevant to what services you're providing, and that can give those pieces. There's a lot of options for supports with text-to-speech. So one that's free that you can offer families is Speechify. That's an app where if they take a picture of the book, of the worksheet, of the screen, it will actually translate it into an audio version, especially for those families or students that aren't as tech savvy, or maybe a site that doesn't have that text-to-speech option.
Okay, I've answered some questions, I think, on HIPAA compliant software. Do you want to answer? Maybe we'll take one from Stephen, and then Rena's been waiting for a while.
Perfect.
So Stephen says, what teaching platform do you recommend that allows a teacher to present students with visual cues, choice making, or a writing prompt on the screen while verbally communicating with the student through Zoom or Google Duo?
I really like Go Formative. It's free because you can have them easily log in if they're capable of doing that. It has short answer. It has multiple choice, fill in the blank. It translates really well with both academic and social emotional because you can put some of those I feel statements in there as well. And that is accessible at any time. It also will capture your their responses, and it's very simple to use. You can do it for one student. They get a code, so you give them the link of GoFormative, they get a code, and that works really well. But I would warn you on those kinds of pieces, sometimes you have to have some ability for students to have some tech savvy where they can actually type that code in. So that's really beneficial. So I wrote it in the chat. Go Formative is one of the easiest ones. It's really quick. You don't have to be tech savvy to do it.
Okay, we're going to take Rena. Thank you for you're unmuted. So go ahead and ask your question.
So my question is, I'm in the Cajon Valley District in San Diego. We're having them, the district is pushing out a playlist for the gen ed students, and then they've asked us to modify the ones that are needed to be modified. My question about that is, as far as timing, I know that they don't want the kids on Zoom more than an hour. Is that correct?
That's really your district decision. That's a local decision.
Okay, so my question was timing. Like, are we allowed to have our groups, which I think was answered earlier, and then one-on-one time? So our special ed kids are going to be getting on the computer more than the gen ed kids. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think, in talking with some other teachers, like I know Erin, who's going to be presenting next week, she said that for CAVA, they have assistants who kind of get on with the students maybe after live instruction and work with them for a few hours. So it might be appropriate in certain situations if they're getting additional support. Yeah, but is your concern about screen time?
Screen time, because we're discussing the counselors and the speech therapists and OT.
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be like, okay, now I got my 30 minutes. Now I got my, and the student's going to be on, maybe possibly 2 hours, 3 hours after the gen ed kids, after they've done that hour. Yeah, so I was thinking about that, like, and it's going school by school. Like, okay, you need to have 30 minutes of office hour time, and you need to, and so I'm just trying to figure out what our role is right now during all this.
Right. So one of the suggestions that I would make in talking, because this is where the union comes into support, is looking at, just like you would in a classroom day. So how much gen ed, because for FAPE, we're talking about access, right? And typically Zoom time can be recorded, especially in our general ed settings, where most schools have push and pull out, right? Even if, regardless of sections, to where that can really reduce the time, because those students trying to attend more in a virtual setting when they haven't been before is problematic, where getting those minutes in, I mean, it's not like we've groomed these students to be prepared for those. And there's going to be lots of missing minutes because students are not going to there's not the implementation we could make when they're in the classroom setting, right? When they're absent that day, we bank the minutes till that time. I would suggest both. I would talk to the union and have that with those MOUs, because they might not be able to handle that level. And see what access you guys can take with that, because you're right, that can be it. We I currently right now teach general ed, but I've also taught intervention with the school that I'm at. I taught special ed, obviously, as well. And I, as a gen ed teacher, push them out. I have a recording, I will give you the supports, and then work in tandem with our special ed departments who do large block time of support, where so that way families get flex, right? If they have to go to the grocery store, they're not going to be online with you. And so there needs to be that consideration. It really has to be that working with your union, pushing back to the district saying, I need more guidance.
Yeah, and I think, too, like that it goes for us as well. Like we also need to consider our own screen time because I know since we've been in this situation, I feel like I'm on like 60 hours like a week right now on my laptop, and that's just not healthy for anyone. So I know your president. Reach out to Chris and talk to them about your concerns. I think they're valid, and you guys might need to do something a little different. I like the idea of having it recorded, and maybe you guys find different ways for those services. So great question, thank you. And please email us, like if you guys make a decision and you feel like it's working, email us at ipd@cta.org and let us know so we can share that with other folks. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question here. So Kimmy, you had a question. We've unmuted you.
It's being partially addressed, but as a resource specialist, I do a lot of pullout, but I don't do a lot of lessons. I'm reteaching or explaining or practicing skills with the students. And so I'm trying to figure out what method would work best with that. I mean, would it just be like a Zoom thing where, it's a live interaction that sort of mimics a regular pullout? Because I don't use PowerPoints or anything like that. So I'm just trying to figure out how it would translate.
So one of the things that I want to just make clear with everyone is that we're all being thrown into this, and everything that was normal is now not normal.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the PowerPoint piece is just for them to have a visual, just like if you were sitting next to them and they brought in the writing assignment from their teacher and you were working on and breaking it down and giving them extra graphic organizers and support. It's just the visual. So whether it's a piece of paper, PowerPoint, I just use PowerPoint because we're in a digital setting. There's two ways you can go about it. You can do a live session with Zoom in small group where you're doing skill practice or reteaching or any of those pieces. You can also do videos where if you notice that 7 kids are getting this assignment this week from the gen ed teacher and you want to do a quick 3-minute video that they can have and then break down those. Where you're spending that time just breaking it down for them so they have access to it. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. So all I'm communicating is really you're just translating whatever you would physically be doing into a digital access, if that helps.
Yeah, I mean the only thing that seems like it would be comparable is live Zoom.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
And hopefully you guys will get some time to kind of transition. Like there's got to be some flexibility. I mean, we're going to be hearing next Friday, we're going to have a panel also about some teachers who have never taught virtually before and what they're doing at the high school level. So we're going to do more like that. But yeah, it's a kind of a learning process for everyone. I don't know if anyone has the answer. I'm just going to be honest. I don't have all the answers, certainly. CDE doesn't have all the answers. We're just figuring this out as we go as well. So if people do have things that are working, we're encouraging them to share. And that is ipd@cta.org. So if you have things that are going well, please share it. That's what we're doing every week with our staff, is sharing what's working in the field. So it's 5:02. I think if we can take one more question and then we have to go because we have another panel starting at 5:15. So I think we had Allison here. So Allison, you're unmuted, or you should be soon. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Allison.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry, I just stood up really fast and then I heard my name and came
That's
back.
okay.
I was just asking about how districts were implementing behavior goals, interventions, and or services for their students.
So that is a case-by-case basis, and some of the reason why is just because it's a global pandemic, right? Some of the services that we do, whether it's in the classroom or even beyond, as you know, some of our districts and then personally have in-home behavior supports to where that's obviously not able to happen during this time. I've seen a lot of live supports in that way. So thinking of working with the student or working with that family and seeing how it's going, specifically geared towards this time rather than, and readjusting those IEPs, but it's a district by district basis because we have some districts in the state that are not permitting live streaming at all. And so those things are coming up. I do know that the Department of Ed is working on trying to find solutions and give guidance as well with how all of the different local districts are dealing with it, because it is a concern, and especially with those students because that's already an area of need for them, and then we're now in a global crisis and they're going to need extra support. My suggestion is giving the families, if you have anything that's immediate or you've seen anything that's immediate that's working, that you can give tips of like, okay, for this student, giving, this is rewarding classes working really well, that kind of thing, because it is, since we didn't get any planning time, there's not necessarily any action steps that I've seen that's ready to go at this point in time.
And I just shared, so Anna and I are both on a CDE work group addressing these issues, and we just talked about this today, like mental health. We talked about like how to get physical services to students. Everyone's still figuring that out. So if you go to that sipinclusion.org, the CDE and the group we're working on, which is a statewide group, we're working on finding resources and ideas to address those issues. And so the CDE is also going to be putting out a Thursday webinar series on issues like this. And I think if you go to that website, sipinclusion.org, that was my understanding, is that that's where they're going to post everything. Yeah, so they'll be posting webinars there every Thursday, and also they're going to be doing like one pagers hopefully every week. It's just a matter of like finding these answers. But that's another resource that you should use, and know that the CDE and statewide organizations are aware of it, and we're trying to figure it out. So, and I think that's really it today. We're not able to answer everybody else's questions. Oh, Stephen is asking, yes, sipinclusion.org. I have it in the chat. Just seeing anything else. So questions about compensatory time before I let you guys go. That needs to be bargained in terms of how you are going to figure out compensatory minutes, whether it's this summer or it's in the fall, because right now, like I'm in Riverside County and we were just told schools cannot reopen until June 19th. So that might impact ESY. We don't know exactly how that's going to impact it yet. So a lot of these are kind of local decisions, and anything dealing with working conditions have to be bargained by our union. So that includes teachers providing that compensatory time. So with that, if you go to, it takes about 48 hours, and since we're on a weekend, it'll be next week, but 48 to 72 hours for the recording to get up, because we have another staff person we work with. So, and it's the weekend. So it's cta.org/IPD trainings. If you, I'm going to share the screen real quickly.
Yes, sure.
And I'll show you guys where that's at. So here's the SIP Inclusion website, sipinclusion.org. But if you go back to the website where you registered, I'm going to just show you this. You go right here. Here's the CTA webinar recordings. This is where the handouts will be from today. And if you go to our leader resources page, which you can see up here at the top, and you go to the COVID-19 resources, that special ed FAQ should be posted there at some point next week. Actually, it is right here. It must have just gotten posted. So delivering special ed services. And you have to be a CTA member to access that. So if you see there, I have to log in. So anyways, thank you all very much. Hang in there. You're all doing a really wonderful job. It's okay to fail. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. This is all new. It's not going to be perfect. But take care of yourselves this weekend. Get some rest, get some sunshine, and we will talk to you all later. Have a wonderful evening.